Why I do a podcast. Hey, this is Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. I want to share with you some personal reasons why I do a podcast. I'm not looking for fame. I'm not looking for fortune. I use a podcast in order to practice the presentation of ideas in a hearable way. Now, this is something very interesting that can benefit you if you're a copywriter, if you're a marketer, if you're in business. The fact that I can tell how long someone has listened to my program, I tend to do 15-minute podcasts, how long somebody's listened, I can start understanding how to make my speech more interesting. I don't know about you, but have you ever had the situation where you've answered a question for somebody and you just really weren't sure whether they got it, and you wondered, well, is it my speech patterns? Is it how I communicate it? Now, unfortunately, most people don't even think about that. They're going to say something, and if the other person doesn't understand it, they're going to say, well, it's their fault. They didn't understand it because they're dumb. They just don't have the wisdom that I have. Well, I have a little bit different perspective. I've answered thousands of questions from newsletter subscribers over the last 2 decades. I've been writing a newsletter since 1993. And my newsletters have changed. Originally, it was about business success. It was about networking. I've written a lot of papers for, I used to be a systems engineer. I wrote a lot of papers on how to implement network systems and how to implement computer systems and how to manage source code. And I had a little newsletter around that. I tended to find that if I wrote a newsletter about a topic that I was implementing, that my implementation became better. Now, from a health perspective, I have had memory-related issues because I tend to work very hard, work long hours. I even worked for 10 years, 7 days a week, 2 shifts. And by the way, I ended up with a TIA stroke. But my point being is because there was so much new information coming in, I found a newsletter a way to chronicle the top ideas and concepts. Now, when I was selling, I would learn a lot of information in order to sell a product, and I'd use a newsletter to organize that information. And I found that my clients found it very useful because if I was to go in a presentation and introduce them to a new idea, a new concept, it was literally new to them. And if they didn't have some kind of takeaway item, it didn't stick. So even though I in my podcast, I cover topics that are very useful and address things that I've been asked about before, I have no way of knowing that the person on the other end, you, the listener, is going to, benefit from this information. I really don't know. So what I'm practicing with my podcast is how to communicate clearly, how to communicate in an interesting way, because things have changed. You used to be able to do a drone on about something and people would just listen because there was nothing else to listen to. But today there are billions and billions of hours of video and audio and everything online that you have no shortage of things to listen to. So how do I adjust my speaking patterns? How do I adjust my delivery so that I'm more interesting and that individuals stay with the program longer? Because what I do have has been proven to be valuable in a marketplace, and you just might not have heard it before. And so what we use is the language of the hearable way. How do I communicate the key ideas and concepts to get you started in a topic in a hearable way, in a way that you'd want to listen from period to period in order to get the results that you're looking for? Now, I create the podcast as a promotion for my business. Now, my business is consulting. My business is risk management. I'm doing this both from a career perspective and from a consultative perspective. But for you, what is it? Creating a podcast may not be the right way of doing it because you don't want to be out in the public about the topics that you know and understand. But doing short talks within the company or the industry that you're working in may actually be much better. And by the way, these podcasts do not create a large number of qualified prospects. I want to dispel that right up front. I know there's a lot of folks talking about how podcasting can promote your business and how you can just do a podcast and people will flood and you'll get new contracts. While I have gained enough contracts to pay for the equipment and the effort it takes to do podcasting, if you're creating a podcast just to get new business, you're going to fall in a sea of other people doing the exact same thing. So again, let's go to a second level. Let's go to the next level. Why are we creating this? Well, Again, I create this for my own improvement and skill development. But there's another thing as well. I create the podcast for existing customers. So private clients over the years have had problems and challenges, and I've helped them solve those problems and challenges. And I have this sneaky little suspicion that after they're done paying for the work, they go off and do the work, and then they have attrition, they have turnover, they have new people on staff, and they need a refresher on some of the topics. And I know this because some clients have said, hey, look, we did work with you 2 years ago, and now I'd like a refresher. Well, instead of going in and doing that refresher one time, I very often do a 15-minute presentation about the topic, release it as a podcast. I point the client to that. I say, hey, has this got you started? And in some cases, they're like, yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. You've gotten us started in that idea. And by the way, most of the client work I do, there'll be some sort of binder with instructions or a process. There'll be some kind of means of controls if there's if there's regulatory challenges. In the case of when I write a business development plan for somebody, there's going to be a binder that has sample copies of materials. It's going to have their customer avatar. All they needed was the 15 minutes. Now, could we have gone back and forth and negotiate, me coming out and doing a training session, me coming out and refreshing the binder? Sure, we could have. But in 15 minutes, I got them satisfied and I moved on. See, I'm not desperate for clients. I know if you're desperate for clients, that 15-minute call and they're saying, you're thinking, I can get this done in 15 minutes, but you got to hook them for an hour. You got to hook them for an hour because you're dependent on those billable hours. It's not the case here. So for my personal reasons doing a podcast, I'm not really concerned about getting a whole bunch of clients from it. And what I have found is that typically people who are listening to introductory materials tend not to be really good clients. They need to do something more. Now, what I do in every podcast is I offer you the opportunity to ask questions. The reason I'm doing that, and I know I'm giving you some inside baseball here. I know I'm taking you behind the scenes. But again, as a copywriter, marketer, or business development professional, you need to understand why certain things are done rather than just going out and getting a contract to write podcast scripts. Because if you don't understand why things are done and that client comes back and says, my podcast, I've done 300 episodes and haven't got a single customer. I've done 100 episodes, haven't got a single customer. It's your fault. You can help them understand that, look, you haven't just done 300 episodes. You've refined your speaking skills. And you know what? Podcasting may not be the right audience for you. And you can bring it up early in the conversation so that they use the podcast to generate leads to do a webinar. And the larger webinar is actually recorded and it becomes an information product. And then the information product is used to satisfy the deeper desires of the original leads while generating additional leads for their larger product and service. See, that's a marketing system. You could just podcast. Yeah, it doesn't do anything. Now, I said earlier that my podcast doesn't generate qualified leads. No, it doesn't. The people who are leads from the podcast are very low value and they are not ready to do business with me. However, the marketing system generates an unlimited supply of customers who make it necessary that while I could bilk a client for an hour, I could also just do a 15-minute response to their question and get them started in the direction that they need to be in to get the results that they're looking for. See, in this world where there's an unlimited supply of contractors, there's an unlimited supply of copywriters, there's an unlimited supply of marketers. What is it you're going to do to build that relationship and retain that customer? Now, I need different skills. In the past, I could write a letter, I could write a written special report, I could do a lot of things to help a client, and they would appreciate it and they would hire. That doesn't happen this way much anymore. Clients have higher expectations. They also have a wider variety of resources, and very often they can find materials on the internet that feel satisfactory, but aren't actually good value. And I know you've seen this as well, where you go on the internet to answer a question, and you get an answer, and then you apply that answer, and it's bullshit. It doesn't matter. It doesn't work. It's just a wreck, and you go off and search for the next thing. Well, a lot of your clients are in a searching mode. What are we going to do to get them from searching to finding answers, solutions, next steps. Now, if it was a off-the-street individual who did not have a binder that I'd helped them produce in the past, and they didn't have a relationship with me, and they raised the same question, I could send them to the previous 15-minute presentation, but I would follow up. Marketing system here. I would follow up and say, hey, now that you've listened to the audio, by the way, I could track the link they click on. I could see how long that they've watched the video. And if they haven't gone all the way through the video, I can say, well, what did this video, what did this audio not do to help you understand the big problem that you're facing right now, and get them into a paid consultation. So again, it's a complex approach, but it's difficult for your competitors to copy. Your competitors will create a podcast. You might even have a podcast that has little results, and you're thinking, well, podcasting doesn't work. Well, yeah, no, podcasting doesn't work by itself. You need a whole marketing system. And when you have the whole marketing system in place, you're better off because now you have a means that cannot be seen to bring in customers under the radar. I'm going to give you one last example because it's very easy to implement. I don't want people to listen to this podcast on the podcasting channels. I don't want them to listen to it on YouTube. I don't want them to listen to it at Spreaker, Apple. I think we're on Apple iPod, the Apple Podcasts, Google Play. This podcast is syndicated to probably 15 or 20 different sources, thousands and thousands of listeners. I don't want them to listen to it out there. I want them to come to the website because when you come to the website, I can tag you with a cookie. And now you're going to see my lead generation ads. Now I'm going to know a little bit more about you. Now I'm going to see whether or not you're a prospect. So the podcast goes out there on the bigger channel and it gets these listens. These people, I don't even know who they are. They follow, they like, they subscribe. Who knows who they are? But as soon as I can get them to come to the website, to visit www.adbriefings.co.uk and go to the contact page and raise their hand and say, hey, I got a question that I'd like you to answer in a future podcast. Now I've got the full contact information of those individuals. Now, I don't take a lot of emails because I don't like email. I just don't want to deal with a lot of email. It's just, I'd rather get a letter from somebody and I sit there with the letter in front of me and respond to it with a podcast, respond to it with a personal note. I can send them a letter, links to the podcast. My point being is that we have to get more from the tools that we have. And while we're using those tools, we must use them to improve our overall skills. My objective is to get you to listen to 15 minutes. It's built into 3 sections, 5-minute sections: introduce the problem, describe the pain, offer some solutions. I'm not trying to solve your big problems here because most of the problems that you guys come to me with are bigger than a 15-minute podcast. But I want to get you started down the right path so that you're not getting distracted by YouTube, that you're not getting distracted by other people's podcasts. You're not getting distracted by false information. I want to give you the best that I've got every time. So why do I produce this podcast? Well, the reasons vary. There are many reasons that I produce this podcast. Is it worth my time and effort to produce this podcast? Yes and no. There are times where I could have the same conversation with a client over the phone and they're paying me to have that conversation, and it just, why give it away for free? Now, remember, all my phone calls are recorded, so very often I can excerpt that call. I don't do a whole lot of that, but I could excerpt the call with permission from the client or just because it doesn't mention the client's name, and we could get that out there as a podcast. The podcast gives me a serial way of getting things out there, but I would believe, though, and I see from the evidence that a prospect newsletter is more powerful. But where does the content for the prospect newsletter come from? Well, it comes from transcriptions of the podcasts. Where does the content of special reports come from? Transcriptions of podcasts. So why not put it out there? Why not help solve some of your problems? Why not practice the speaking skills rather than just the writing skills? Why not go to that next level? Now, if you need help putting together a podcast, which by the way, you might not want your own podcast. There are reasons not to podcast. But the periodic recording, the presentations, the webinars, the events, if you'd like help in that area, that is something that we can help you with. There's even opportunities for you to be a guest here. I haven't done interviews in a while, but I really did enjoy the interviews I've done with best-selling authors, the interviews that I've done with experts in their field, including individuals you've probably never heard of, but they're experts. So again, I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. Visit me at www.adbriefings.co.uk. Ask your questions. These questions will be answered in a podcast. I'll write a letter back to you. It doesn't really matter to me, but now you know the reason why. It answers the question, if your time's so valuable, then why are you recording a podcast? If your time's so valuable, then why are you so willing to answer people's questions? If your time is so valuable, then why? Well, the reason why is because it's a part of my marketing system. And if all I was doing was answering your question in an audio recording, then I wouldn't be doing much at all. This is how we transform business relationships into profits. This is how we create and keep profitable customers. I am creating an artifact that can go out there on my behalf and generate leads, qualify leads, and drive folks into a sales funnel. I know it feels a little dirty that I've given you all the behind the scenes, but hey, it's about helping you solve problems. And again, I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. Thanks for listening.